Centre for the History of People, Place and Community fosters engaged, innovative research into placed histories across all regions and periods, from the rural to the urban and the parish to the metropolis, with an emphasis on the localised, the micro-historical and the site-specific. And we work together with others to develop imaginative new approaches to making history and to identify opportunities for history to make a difference in the real world today. Now, the Victoria County History of England is one of the projects based here in our centre, but of course it's also led from communities right across England. The project was founded in 1899 and dedicated to Queen Victoria, which is how it gets its name. It aims to write a comprehensive history of every place in England, from the very earliest times to the present day, and it's trusted as the highest quality place-based research. Today, in its 125th birthday year, the project is active in 17 counties and 2 ridings of Yorkshire, with local communities playing a key role. And it's lovely to see VCH friends and colleagues in the room this evening, as well as amongst our speakers. The project has had to adapt and evolve many times in its long history, and you'll be hearing about some of the latest developments today. So in today's seminar, it's my great pleasure to introduce several of my VCH colleagues from the Victoria County History of Wiltshire to discuss their work on Wiltshire Volume 20, completing a red book in difficult times and making new links with local communities. After a sudden loss of external funding in 2014, Wiltshire VCH has had to find new ways to carry forward its work. The challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic also impacted on their research in progress. Today, my colleagues from VCH Wiltshire are going to share their experiences in forging new and really successful approaches to fundraising, research, and community engagement. There's going to be a lot here to inform and to inspire us all, both those of us in the room and those who will watch this recording on our archive, where it will be hugely valuable. So we have speaking to us this evening, David Moss, who is the chair of the Wiltshire VCH Trust, James Holden, Trustee and Chair of the project group, Dr. John Chandler, the Wiltshire VCH Consultant Editor, and Dr. Louise Ryland-Epton, Wiltshire VCH Researcher and Author. Lovely to have you all with us. And just to say right from the top, thank you so much for everything you do for the VCH project. One final note before I hand over to our speakers. When the time comes, you'll have 2 different options for asking questions. If you're happy to ask your question on camera, you can raise your hand using the function in Zoom and I'll come to you. If you'd prefer not to speak on camera, you can also put your question in the chat box. If there's a question there, I'll give you the option of whether you want to speak, or I will go ahead and read it. If you could hold your questions until I invite them, that means that they won't get missed if they're languishing in the chat box before then. But do feel free to discuss and respond in the chat box during the seminar. And of course, if you're so inclined, do live tweet using our handle at @CHPPC_IHR, if that's your thing. So without further preamble from me, it's my great pleasure to hand over to David Moss, I think, who is going to begin the presentation from VCH Wiltshire. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm, as Catherine says, David Moss, Chairman of the Wiltshire Victoria County History Trust. Work on Wiltshire's VCH started in the 1950s with funding from the local authorities and for a while from the University of the West of England. 18 volumes were published, most recently that on Cricklade in 2011. Now, there's a slide now that will show you how much of the, here we are, of the county is already covered. The areas marked off in green are those for which red books have already been published, of which the most recent was, as I said, Cricklade in 2011. The areas marked in yellow are those where we are presently researching. The Chippenham area, the subject of volume 20, which is our particular concern this evening, is the yellow area up at the top. And the areas marked in red are those which we have yet to get started on. The local authority funding that had kept the project going dwindled and then, as Catherine said, dried up in 2014. A charitable trust was founded to try and fill the gap to raise funds and to produce the remaining volumes. We decided to tackle Chippenham and the surrounding villages next. Many of the first trustees had Chippenham connections, and the Trust's website was called My Chippenham until the prospect of starting work on another area prompted change. More on this later. How to raise funds. From an early stage, Wiltshire's Lord Lieutenant, currently Mrs. Sarah Rose Troughton, has been patron and has taken a leading role in urging the project forwards. Annual garden parties, hosted in attractive gardens around the county, have become part of the county's social calendar, an event people expect to go to, and many donate even if they are unable to attend in a particular year. The drinks are often provided by the host, and sometimes the canapes as well, without cost to the Trust. Invitations, you can see this year's, this last year's actually, card up as an example. The invitations are produced on good card, designed to look good on a mantel shelf, and these are posted rather than emailed to those on our list. We judge that the attractiveness of the invitation more than justifies the cost of the card and the postage. We tried organising guided tours around historic towns in the county, but they tended not to attract many people and did not raise much money. Post-COVID, we have found that online talks are more popular and a better way of raising funds. We're grateful to Wiltshire Museum in Devizes for letting us use their webinar to hold these talks. The next of them will be on Wednesday, the 26th of June, if you're interested, when one of our researchers, Rosalind Johnson, will speak about her recent research on Clarendon. You can find details of that on our website, which is www.wiltshirehistory.org. It's important to mention legacies. We don't often get them, but they can be significant. I've mentioned that the loss of local authority funding caused a hiatus in work, but there was an exception. A substantial legacy allowed work to start on a volume covering Mere and the surrounding villages, which will be volume 19. This has been led by the IHR, but with some assistance from the Wiltshire VCH Trust, and is now nearing completion. Work on the Chippenham volume is now also nearly complete. Research is all done, editing is underway with publication of the Red Book expected in the third quarter of 2025. This will be quite an event, the first Red Book in Wiltshire, in the Wiltshire series in 14 years. And we are now thinking of how to make best use of the event to raise the profile of the VCH locally and to attract more funds. 5 years ago, the Lord Lieutenant and the then chairman of the Trust, Vicky Landell Mills, were wondering how best to boost funding and speed up WVCH work. They hit upon the idea of inviting Michael Wade, OB, to become our president, a new position in the Trust. He is a leading figure in insurance and financial services, and has been able to use his connections to raise sufficient funds to allow us to start work on a new volume in the Alderbury part of the county. He generously hosted a lunch at his then home, Trafalgar Park, which raised sufficient funding for work to be started on a volume covering Alderbury and its surrounding villages in the southeast of the county. And you can see here the front page of the brochure we produced on the occasion to encourage people to take an interest in the VCH and the getting the new vehicle, the new work on a new volume launched. Since then, Michael has attracted substantial grants for us from a charitable trust, and Madeleine, Countess of Bessborough, has generously hosted a fundraising reception at Roche Court, which is in the area being researched for the new volume to help keep work moving on it. I should also mention that as the amount of money handled by the Trust grew, we thought it wise to convert the Trust into a CIO, or Charitable Incorporated Organization. Initially, the Trust was set up informally, without any legal personality or any financial protection for the trustees. Becoming a CIO both removed these weaknesses and gave us the opportunity to recognize in our constitution the electronic means of working that have so quickly become a norm of modern life. And finally, some thoughts on ways of raising awareness of the Wiltshire VCH and encouraging donations. In the early days of the Trust, the Friends of Wiltshire VCH were set up as a means of attracting supporters. This still exists, and subscriptions from its members are very welcome, but membership has been dwindling. This may be because we have arranged few events exclusively for friends, but it has seen more sense to open our events to all supporters rather than limit them just to friends. We produce a newsletter roughly 3 times a year, in which we can keep supporters up to date with progress, give summaries of recent and news of forthcoming events. Put together by volunteers and distributed almost entirely by electronic means, there is next to no cost in producing the newsletter. And here is an example of the front page of a recent issue of the newsletter, so you can see the sort of thing we have in mind. We took the opportunity, as we were preparing to start work on a new volume, to update the design of our website. You can see the new one if you go to www.wiltshirehistory.org. And we've produced a new leaflet, which can be made available at events and at public places like libraries, and which, of course, has links to the website. And here, my last slide is the front of the leaflet that we have just produced. And lastly, we work with local history groups wherever they exist and are interested. Louise has been much involved in this, and she'll be saying much more about it shortly. That's all from me. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to hand over to James Holden, who is chairman of our project group, and therefore knows all about what he's going to tell you about, which is how we commission research and writing. James, over to you.
David, thanks very much indeed, and good afternoon, everybody. David's explained what we're doing now to get the funding to pay for our research, and I want to just spend a few minutes talking about how in the new circumstances since 2014, we've managed the commissioning and the management of our research. Before 2014, of course, we had full-time employees of Wiltshire County Council working on the VCH in Wiltshire, which of course in many ways made the situation straightforward. Everything to do with their employment was handled by the County Council. There was a separate small committee which steered them, and you had people who were fully committed to our work, and as a consequence gained a very substantial local knowledge. There were no doubt some problems with this approach. I wasn't personally involved at that time, so I can't comment, but it was a good situation to be in, and is reflected in the number of volumes we were able to publish before 2014. When that went, we had to face up to the question of how we were going to pay for our research without employed staff. We could not employ staff simply because we couldn't guarantee the continuity of income from our fundraising activities, which would have been necessary in order to do that successfully. And also, we would have found the business of actually managing employment, which nowadays is a pretty complex area, really very much beyond our scope. So we had to cast around and find a different way of managing the research. And the solution we came up with is to divide any volume of the VCH up into chapters and to commission individual researchers to write, to put it at its most crude level, a chapter each at a time. In that way, we can guarantee that we have the money available to pay for that work to be done, and we can let a contract for an individual to research and write the chapter. There was a difficult decision in this, and that is whether we were to let a contract for someone at an hourly or daily rate to write a contract, I beg your pardon, to write a chapter, or whether we were to commission it as on a sort of, to put it very crudely, on a sort of piecework basis. In other words, a fixed sum to pay for the complete process of researching and writing a chapter. We decided on the latter approach, mainly because that was the only way we could guarantee that we would have enough money available to pay the person to complete the work. So when we started using this new approach after 2014, we first of all, of course, had to make some estimates of how much it should cost in an employer, in a contractor's time, a researcher's time, to research and write any particular chapter. We made estimates which were based on previous work and which related to the word count, the expected word count for each chapter. That was, of course, an approximate exercise. We then had to draw up contract conditions, which we did at the outset, and that seems to have been relatively straightforward and worked well. The next thing we had to do was, of course, to recruit suitable researchers. We could only guarantee work for one contract at a time, typically about a year's work. And therefore, the offer that we had to make to people with the suitable skills was not as attractive as other offers potentially available to them, which might have involved employment on a more committed basis. Nevertheless, we went ahead on that basis. We also face the issue, which my colleague John Chandler will say a bit more about in a moment, that researchers coming out of universities now often do not have the breadth of knowledge necessary to cover the very wide scope of VCH volumes. So those were the main issues we had to think about setting up for the work. One other I haven't yet mentioned, and that is that we, as a bunch of trustees, all volunteers, we, until, as David has mentioned, until we turned the trust into a CIO recently, we took the financial risk. And so we made a rule very early on in our work that we would only ever let a contract if we had all the money to pay for that contract already in the bank. Not the sort of practice that a commercial company would undertake, but because we had to guard against risks so rigorously, we felt that was necessary. And finally, from me, just a few words as to how this has turned out in practice. When it came to finding suitable researchers, I think it's fair to say that in the early days, we had a bit of a wobbly ride. It was very difficult to attract suitable people with the range of skills that we were after. And we had one or two cases where we had to say, well, thank you very much, but actually we need someone else to do this work. But what's now happened, and this is the experience over a number of years, is that we have 3 researchers working with us all of whom are experienced and excellent. And I think the trustees spend considerable time thinking how we're going to persuade our researchers to stay with us. And so a clear objective of ours is to try, insofar as we have the financial resources to do so, to offer continuity of work to our researchers, all of whom, of course, have other interests and research work that they do outside VCH. The areas of expertise that our researchers have, and of course they come from different backgrounds and will have concentrated on different types of history and different periods of history, can be used to complement each other. And in more recent times, we have been having researchers sharing contracts, so that one, for example, might do the medieval period, and the second researcher will do the early modern and modern periods. And that seems to be working pretty well. I think it's a good way to sort of narrow the scope a little bit of what we demand. But of course, the approach that we now use does result in having a number of different individuals, each contributing to every VCH volume. And so the process of tying it together is critical to the work. And in that respect, we are very fortunate indeed to have John Chandler as consultant editor handling this work for us. And I think just the final point that I would make is that we have this situation where we have a group of trustees who are all volunteers, and a much smaller group of paid contractors, researchers working for us, but all with a shared identity with the work and a sense of commitment to it. And that aspect of the work and how we could develop that is something that's been exercising us considerably in recent times. And I think we've been working to bring trustees and researchers closer together. So I'm now going to hand over to John Chandler, who will cover quite similar territory, but from a rather different perspective through his work as consultant editor. And then we will end with Louise Ryland-Epton, who will take us off on a different angle to talk about working with local communities. So at this point, I hand over to John.
Thank you very much indeed, James, and good evening to everyone. Am I on screen? I'm not sure if I am.
Yes, you are, John.
Thank you. What I'd like to do really is tell you about my involvement with the VCH, both before 2014 and after and since. But then I really want to discuss a few of the advantages of the way we've been doing things and the disadvantages, and have just a word too about work with volunteers. So I became acquainted with the permanent Wiltshire VCH researchers a long time ago, during the 1980s or even earlier. I was a local studies librarian in Wiltshire, so they were using my library and I was doing research, so I was working in the archives as well. And I was co-opted onto this committee, which James mentioned, that there was an advisory committee which just met once a year, I think. And I was on that during the 1990s. And I worked alongside the county editor Douglas Crowley, who had started in Wiltshire, I think in 1970, and spent his entire career as a VCH editor, retiring about 2006, something like that, I think. And I worked with him on a number of projects. In fact, we typeset a red book. Not everybody realizes this. I typeset volume 17 with him sitting beside me and altering all the footnotes and things. And we did 3 paperback editions derived from VCH histories, but all around 1999 to early 2000s. They were on Malmesbury and Devizes and the Amesbury area. And then I became involved with the England's Past for Everyone VCH project, which some of you will remember in the early 2000s. The permanent staff in Wiltshire didn't really want to get involved in it. They just wanted to go on writing parish histories, which was their job. But they called me in to see if I'd get involved. And I did work on paid work for the VCH EPE project, and helped to bring the sort of testbed volume to publication in 2007 on Codford. And I later did sort of odd jobs on other volumes, particularly a Herefordshire volume that got stuck. And then in 2011, I took a contract with the Gloucestershire VCH Trust, which had been in a similar situation that Wiltshire was about to get into, as their county editor to complete a red book, Gloucestershire volume 13. And I continued in that or a similar role until a few weeks ago. Well, after 2014 in Wiltshire, I was consulted about various matters in the first couple of years. And I looking back at the email, at one point it was even suggested that VCH Gloucestershire might contract to take over and research VCH Wiltshire, but we didn't do that. But I had no formal role in VCH Wiltshire until January 2016, when I agreed to act as an unpaid consultant to the Trust, because, as James has mentioned, it followed serious misgivings about the substandard work of one in particular, one of the contractors, and I was asked for an opinion. And then in 2017, I took the first of a series of small paid contracts to work on sections of the Chippenham text, and I continued in this role. So I attend trust and committee meetings, I prepare scoping documents and similar as required, sometimes for fee, sometimes gratis. And I liaise closely with central office, as Catherine knows, and with my fellow researchers. So that's where I sit in all this. Now, I'd like to just say a word about advantages and disadvantages of our approach. And I'm only commenting from the perspective of the work of researching and writing the text, not on any aspects of fundraising events or publicity, which of course David and Jane, David in particular, has already discussed. Well, as researchers, we attend and are answerable to the committee which James chairs, the project group. And this includes trustees, and it includes local experts, including the previous curator of Chippenham Museum and various others. And the meetings are chaired by James Holden, who he's a very good chairman, but he's also a very knowledgeable historian in his own right. And we do value his expertise that he brings to the table. And I think we all find these meetings very helpful. We're very fortunate, as James has said too, in that we've recruited 3 sort of long-serving researchers, and they have a wide range of historical knowledge and experience. And as a foursome, we work very closely and happily together. We're all good friends, which is important, and we call on each other for help and advice as needed. We've all been involved in the work on Chippenham. And as James has said, we now regularly split contracts for a parish between our medievalist Mark Forrest, who I think is in the audience, and our social historian Louise, who you'll hear about from in a minute. And we enjoy very friendly cooperation with the staff of the Wiltshire and Swindon History Centre at Chippenham, And three of us are also working in a similar way in Gloucestershire. So we see quite a lot of each other. In fact, only one of us lives in Wiltshire, and that's Rosalind, and she lives about as far away from Chippenham and still being in Wiltshire as it's possible, further away than we are in Gloucestershire. And Mark lives in Dorchester, you see. So we're a happy little group. That's fine, but there are disadvantages in the way we're working. I think because I've lived in awe of Douglas Crowley's academic acumen for so many years. I'm conscious that because the responsibility is divided between researchers, it's very hard to carry out the systematic trawl of sources and apply a consistent approach, which was the hallmark of the VCH approach when it had permanent staff. And it's still carried on in Oxfordshire. Because the idea was you'd have a salaried permanent staff, they methodically work through a checklist of sources, and there'd be a county editor overseeing them. And there isn't a county editor in Wiltshire. That's not me. I'm just one of the group. And I worry that on so comparatively limited a budget, that there is a danger that we might let standards slip. We try not to, but it's always in the back of my mind that that's what's happening. The work in Wiltshire in the past, 2014 to 17, suffered from a lack of academic supervision. I think the trustees, when they started, thought that historians were historians, and if you contracted a historian to do something, they'd know what to do. I think we've learned that that's not quite how it works. So there was no academic supervision, and they thought that you could just research and write VCH text if you were a historian. But of course it didn't work. The VCH approach to historical research is in many ways very different from what most early career academic historians are used to. Their doctorates will have been on a very specific subject, and they will have had long footnotes arguing tiny points of history. And of course, the VCH doesn't work like that. You know, we have to be jack of all trades and know something about place names and sewage works and bus times and archaeology. You know, so it's not quite like that. But there's also a perception, I think, that a stint with the VCH is a good marker in a CV as a step towards a lectureship or something more lucrative position. And it's understandable, because as James said, we can't offer any job security. I used to think this was a big disadvantage for the VCH, and it is a shame when we lose someone halfway through a contract. But I'm coming around to thinking that actually there is a role for the VCH to become a training ground, an apprenticeship almost, for place-based historians. Not only because from my experience, some do go on to pursue a very distinguished career. We have one in Gloucestershire who's now a professor. But also it wins us friends within the academic community. If somebody has worked on the VCH, they understand what it's trying to do, and they will use it more, and they will support it. So I think that's important. And as I say, it is frustrating when contracts are abandoned unfinished, but we are lucky in Wiltshire. We've achieved a kind of level of stability, and we're keen that it should continue. I was asked to say a word too about volunteers, and that's not really my role, because apart from Louise's projects, which we're going to hear about shortly, we've not enlisted help from volunteer researchers in Wiltshire, unlike what I've experienced in Gloucestershire. Although, of course, we liaise with local residents and experts. And we're planning to extend our training workshops, which we ran in Gloucestershire, into Wiltshire later this year. And there's quite a lot of uptake, I think, already, and interest. One of the problems we would have in recruiting volunteers now in Wiltshire VCH is the area we're currently active on, South East Wiltshire. is that it's a very long way away from where most of the sources are in Chippenham, the opposite end of the county. So it's a 40-mile drive or hour and a half train trip with a change, which is very unlike what we've experienced in Gloucestershire, where the volunteers mostly live in Cheltenham, which is 10 minutes down the road by car, and there's a bus between the two places every 10 minutes. Were we to turn our attention next to the Highworth and Eastern Swindon area, the northeast corner of Wiltshire, that is easily accessible to Chippenham as a motorway with two stops on a motorway, and it would be much more feasible for a volunteer group to develop and work on there. And I have strong links with that part of Wiltshire and know quite a lot of the people involved. So it works in Gloucestershire, but I'm somewhat ambivalent about how it would work in Wiltshire. And really, to dispel my pessimism there, I think I want to pass over now to Louise, who shows that it is possible and that she can do it really well. So I'll say goodbye temporarily and hand over to Louise.
Thank you very much, John. So, as John has alluded, my contribution to this seminar is to reflect on some of the ways Wiltshire VCH works with communities alongside the production of parish histories. And this is based very much on my personal practice and experience. The other researchers that are employed by Wiltshire will have a slightly different take on it. So I want to start by going back to 2017. In 2017, Wiltshire VCH approached a local businessman, Martin Knight, to help raise money for the Bramhill Parish chapter of the volume that we're talking about. Now, while Martin was an admirer of the VCH, he felt that the fundraising task would be easier if a more accessible and engaging community history book could be produced at the same time. Something with a wider remit and a broader range of contributors to the research and writing. Now, the Bramhill Parish History Group was formed to execute this task, and a project steering committee was created. Now, the steering committee included Wiltshire VCH representation. Now, this partnership with Wiltshire VCH was a big part of the project's success. Wiltshire VCH held funds on behalf of the Bramhill Group, and under the terms of an agreement they had with the VCH provided professional historical support, mainly in terms of myself, but also with the assistance of John, plus some charity administration, which included a bank account into which various grants were deposited and from which approved invoices were paid. Wiltshire also appointed 2 of their trustees to engage with and to support the project, and this provided a further level of governance by attending meetings to review progress. Now, this approach enabled the group to recover gift aid and to enjoy other benefits of charitable status, and enabled the group to focus its energy instead on the project itself. Now, I was the historian chosen to work with them, and I began this work in early 2018. Now, I had some experience with the VCH, but no background per se in public history. Now, the next 3 years were a huge learning curve for me, but also tremendously enjoyable at the same time. Now, the group initially raised money from some local sources to fund the project's scoping phase, but it was turned down for heritage lottery funding. And so back at the drawing board, we produced an all singing, all dancing project plan. I think I went through 5 different iterations of it. And finally, we got support from the lottery fund. So the VCH helped us create that lottery funding bid, and also helped with approaching various other bodies. So in total, I think around or in excess of £30,000 was raised for an entire huge project which it became. So by October 2018, the project included plans for history skills workshops, supported research sessions, oral history interviews, even some test pitting to produce a body of research to work into a variety of different outputs. So this included the VCH chapter, and the book as well, but also some talks, a website, a series of articles in the parish magazine and online, a heritage app, and even educational resources for local schools. All of which we planned would culminate in a Bramhill History Festival in September of 2020. Then, unfortunately, our plans were somewhat derailed for a time by the COVID pandemic. Now, this might have delayed us a little bit, but we were able to adapt. Mostly by moving everything online. And again, VCH colleagues, both within Wiltshire and outside of Wiltshire, were great in helping that. So, for example, we had a series of monthly online talks, which were very popular. Now, in the middle of 2021, the text of the book and the Red Book draft were complete with contributions from over 30 volunteers who'd been involved in research, photographs, illustrations, writing up case studies, contributing to editing, and even indexation. A second history festival and book launch happened in December 2021. We did actually manage to have a festival in 2020, but it was all online. So in December 2021, we got nearly 70 people crammed into the village hall, which was the maximum we could accommodate at the time, given a need for social distancing. We had a good range of talks. And a few days later, we even had a children's festival, which was tremendous fun. The book was very well received by the community. It rapidly sold out, and then in December 2023, it became a paperback, and very proud of it. We are too. Now, there were a lot of benefits to the Wiltshire VCH from working collaboratively on this project. Our local profile was definitely raised. The VCH got a chapter with a more modest investment than would have otherwise been required. And the community got a history book they really wanted. This was a collaboration in many senses of the word. But they also got heritage trails, a website, festivals, and a lot more. And these were incredibly, well, I believe they were incredibly good bespoke outputs. These were the outputs that people really wanted. Now, using the skills that we have at VCH and by combining with a local history group, this project provided materials that explored the heritage of Bramhill in so many different and accessible forms, and it meant many more people engaged with their history than helped to research or contribute to the book. In fact, many hundreds more. So there was so much more. No, it wasn't just the outputs. Skills were learned, friendships were made, and our monthly heritage Zoom talks were important for many more reasons during the lockdown than just imparting stuff about the history of the village. So I think communities appreciate our work, but they do find our big red books sometimes a bit dry and factual. Working in this way meant that we touched so many more people, and personally, I found it very satisfying. I could go deeper and explore personal stories and those bits of research that may have ended up only as a line or not even mentioned at all in my VCH draft. writing things in a more relaxed and fun way, but keeping the research figure is also a very satisfying way for me as a historian to work. But the extra research involved in producing diverse outputs can also be fed, in my experience, back into VCH drafts. And this I've done I was able to do with the Bramhill project, but in working on other projects subsequently. I'm also an academic historian. I don't just work on VCH, and I have found that working on collaborative VCH projects actually really beneficial to my academic work. So, for example, one of the stories that appeared in the Bramhill book and was only mentioned in the VCH draft very lightly was a 16th century witchcraft case. Now, I've continued researching that for several years, and that research this year forms the basis of a paper that I'm giving at the British Crime Historians Conference. And it's also, I've also created an article which will appear in the Sarum Chronicle later in the year. Another thing that I've carried on researching is about a medieval causeway that links Bramhill with Chippenham. I've carried on researching its founder and the origins, and this too will be shared in a public lecture in Chippenham in July. And I've also been working with a local museum to help with an exhibition that they're doing on the subject. So if I want to go back to, Bramhill and just reflect on some of the things that I've learned from that experience in particular. What I found was that most people wanted to participate passively in the project. It was really easy to attract people to attend talks and events and lectures and come on walks, but it was rather more challenging to get people to commit to spend time learning new skills and in doing the research, particularly over the long term. Although I did have a handful of people that stayed with me throughout the 3 years of the project and who were willing to do research. VCH knowledge and expertise are really invaluable, but you do need a small, committed nucleus of people that will help you to organise things from within the community. In Bramhill, this was in terms of the steering group, but in other places it might just be 1 or 2 individuals, but you definitely need someone on the ground to help things along. Also, I don't think you can over communicate about your project. We did find in Bramhill, despite communication campaigns in social media, email, the website, through posters, flyers, and in a monthly slot in the parish magazine, there were still members of the community who weren't aware of the full scope of what we were doing, which was a little disappointing at the end. And I also found, although online tools were essentially, particularly through COVID, it was actually the real world events that were absolutely central to the success of the project. So that was the physical talks, walks, visits, lectures, and the children's activities that really got people engaged and forged links and communication channels. And however much you do in terms of collaborating, you will probably find that, well, you will find that everyone has different ideas about what parts of heritage are most important to them or interesting to them and their families. So you may not satisfy everybody all the time. Now, since the Bramhill project, things have developed, and when Wiltshire BCH starts to work producing a parish history, we now actively look at ways to engage with communities. Now, word has got round to in one adjacent parish, Langley Borough, where I was conducting VCH work. On hearing about what we managed to achieve in Bramhill, I was approached directly by the parish council and asked to create a heritage trail, which, with the permission of Wiltshire VCH, I used my VCH research as the basis of that. The parish council wanted to get local people to engage with their heritage and also to draw in visitors, and I think we were successful in that. Certainly there's lots of clicks on the website. The following parishes I've researched were Kington St Michael and Kington Langley. Now, I did a village hall talk a few months into starting the research into Kington St Michael to explain the work of the VCH and to share some of my early findings. And this is now starting to be our standard practice when we start to undertake parish research. This was an incredible talk. It felt like we got the entire community together that night, and it began to take on a life of its own, and people were very quickly very interested in whether they could have their own book of their community. And actually several individuals went to the parish council, and over several meetings the parish council agreed to fund a book. And we're a couple of days out from getting it published, but this is a approved copy of it. And it's generally looking pretty fabulous. And next Thursday, I'm looking very much forward to having another village hall talk, but this time to launch the book. And I'm very proud to say that this is actually a VCH partnership publication, so this is just wonderful. So that is a very quick run through, and I probably talked far too long. I did try and get as much into a short space of time as possible, so I'll stop now, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Louise. David, are you saying any words now, or is it over to me? Is it back to me?
Oh, back to you, Catherine.
Back to me. Fantastic. Oh, well, thank you so much to all our speakers for those presentations. You've shared with us so candidly and so generously reflections on what's worked in VCH Wiltshire, also some things that haven't been so successful. And you've shared your models, your thinking, your working practice really fully. The seminar is going to be such a valuable resource for others in the VCH community and well beyond. You've given us, I think, a real insight into the ecosystem, the community behind any VCH volume, not just the researchers, not just the paid contractors, but many volunteers, trustees. I'm always bowled over by the expertise, by the dedication, and by the enterprise, which I think is so evident in the activities of VCH Wiltshire. I should say to those of you who are joining us this evening that two of our speakers this evening have been recent recipients of our VCH Outstanding Contribution Award. That's both Louise and John. Think of it as like our Victoria County History Gold Blue Peter badge, which we give to people who've done brilliant things to the project. Those are nominated by our VCH community, and I hope very much we'll be awarding more of those to Wiltshire colleagues in future. It's been terrific to hear about the different kinds of engagement that you have with local communities through your fundraising, through awareness raising, and through participatory research itself. Really, a really exciting and innovative model, I think, thinking about these smaller parish histories co-created with communities as stepping stones towards VCH Red Books or sections of Red Books, and of course accessible and varied outputs in their own right, and as we've heard, also leading to other kind of outcomes like exhibitions and heritage trails. Recently, my colleague Ruth Slatter interviewed Louise about the Bramhill Parish History Project, and Louise was speaking about, as she's touched on this evening, the role that project played during lockdown. She's spoken to us this evening about the the particular significance that those online events took on during that difficult time. And Louise said, during that time, we weren't just a community history project, we were a community. And I think that's incredibly powerful in terms of thinking about the way that the VCH can bring people together. I've put a link to the Kingtons book that Louise just referred to in the chat, along with a link to the Brem Hill book and to the VCH Wiltshire website. I'd like to congratulate everyone involved on the Kingtons book, which is, as you've just heard, hot off the press and formally published in about a week's time. We are so proud that this is the first Victoria County History Partnership publication as we open up the model of our outputs beyond our current VCH short series to look at more kind of diverse outputs. We're so proud to be associated with this wonderful volume. So I have questions that I would love to ask. I've rambled on already though, so I want to invite people in the room to ask your questions. You can drop questions into the chat if you want to write something. If I see something there, I will ask whether you want to speak, or if I don't hear from you, I will read it out. You can also raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen. If you can't find that, just shout and we'll find you. So please do share your questions with us. I have a number of questions that I'd like to ask, and I think mine are, all of them, I think, are for all of our speakers. You may want to come in on them in different ways, different speakers on different questions possibly. I have some questions around skills and training, around engaging different communities, and around funding and funding levels, and thinking kind of between county level and parish level. But I want to start by bringing us back to that issue of training that several of you touched on. John, I mean, I couldn't agree enough. I loved the language that you used to describe the VCH, those short contracts for historians, not necessarily a problem, sometimes a really valuable apprenticeship. Was the word you used, or training ground for future historians. I was interested in what some of you said about skills gaps, the needs for skills that VCH demands, and what is there or isn't there in young historians. I mean, the VCH, as you've all acknowledged, such a demanding skill set, you know, from medieval charters to bus timetables, which is huge, although you've shown how different contributors can dovetail together. So I wondered if any of you could say a little bit more on the role that you think the VCH plays within that kind of training ecosystem for historians, the gaps or challenges that you see more broadly in terms of what's feeding into that, or where you think the VCH has something distinctive to offer. And you might want to touch on things, you know, variety of activities you're involved in through the VCH. I'll leave it up to you. Who wants to? Louise, you look like you're unmuted and ready. Oh no, if I just ambushed you.
No.
Okay.
But yeah, I think the training that I have had within Wiltshire and Gloucestershire VCH has been incredible. I am a much better historian now than I was. I think there's nothing that stretches you as much as VCH research. It's a very tough learning curve, but I think with the right support, you know, it's an incredible journey. And I think John and I are both aware that there's a certain assistant professor at UWE who credits the VCH with providing the best bit of her training. You know, it's an incredible way of becoming a better historian. Yeah.
We have featured recently actually on the VCH Central blog for the IHR some kind of testimonies from young historians on how the VCH has helped them to develop their careers. John, you were going to add.
Yes, I kind of add that I've come at this feeling like an amateur. I mean, I've never been in an academic post properly, so I do feel like a jack of all trades. But somehow I feel that the VCH to survive and continue and have good researchers in future, we do need to train them up ourselves. And as Louise says, it's a valuable skill, and possibly we contribute to a rather more rounded view of history and historiography if we've ceded our way of doing things to within the academy, shall we say? Yeah.
I love that, John. And of course, you know, the grassroots training that you've been involved in through the parish histories with local people. I think, John, you're being characteristically, and I see this a lot with colleagues in the VCH, you know, hugely overly humble and modest, using the term amateur. I mean, obviously what's so wonderful about the VCH is that it brings in tremendous expertise, which is found both within universities and in other places. And that's one of the things that I hugely value about the project, that the best historians are evidently not all, they don't all happen to be in academic jobs. And I love the way that we all get to collaborate on this project.
I think, Catherine, too, we see that the old university
extramural departments, external studies departments, were very popular. The local history courses they ran were very popular. And when we started doing these training workshops, we've picked up the same sort of people who would have gone to those evening classes in the past, which of course have all disappeared. But it may be that the VCH has a function there as well, by using the skills that Louise has shown in Bremhill, to take over where the extramural departments have disappeared.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good point. And some of the training that John's referring to, Wiltshire and Gloucestershire have developed a wonderful sort of local history training academy that runs a programme of training seminars annually now, a really kind of structured programme, which really does offer wonderful training for historians, wherever those historians are, in whatever context they are based. Do feel free to share your questions, otherwise I'm just going to enjoy asking lots of my own, because I do have lots. I'd like to move on to a question about engaging different communities, and this is definitely one for David and James as well, because you gave us an incredibly impressive picture, actually, of the different kinds of communities that you engage with through the project, the communities that you engage with through fundraising, those wonderful kind of pictures of you know, very enticing looking invitation cards, and the events, the very carefully kind of curated program of events and engagement that you were speaking about, David. Then there's also the community engagement you do through parish history work. And I wanted to ask about those different communities. How far are there overlaps between your fundraising communities and your kind of participatory research communities? And also, are there any communities that you would really like to be reaching that you're not reaching at the moment? Or do you have aspirations to reach other communities? So I don't know who wants to respond first to that.
Shall I start the ball rolling?
Thank you, James.
I think you asked about the overlap between the two examples of communities you gave. I think at the moment the overlap is very limited indeed. Our fundraising work is aimed at people who actually have the income to be able to afford to donate to us.
Understood. Yeah.
That connection seems so direct, but it is nevertheless the fact that it is that sort of person within the county,
yeah,
who is making the donations, and as David has pointed out, is leading us towards more substantial donations as well. Whereas, of course, the community engagement, which Louise has talked about so brilliantly, is very much the local people on the ground and how we get involved with those. I think the just one follow-up point to make is that we have in Wiltshire a brilliantly active consultant editor in John, and brilliantly active researchers in Louise and her colleagues. From the trustees' side, there's been a historical perspective that trustees, certainly pre-2014, were perhaps a bit like a county council committee. You know, they were sort of the great and the good, who expected to be there to make decisions, but not actually to do anything else. And there's a process of transitioning taking place towards a body of trustees who are going to be prepared to be more active in making things like community engagement happen. And I don't know if David shares my view, but I think we're a little way along that path in Wiltshire, but there's still a fair way still to go.
That's
Yeah,
hugely interesting.
I would endorse that. We're making progress in our direction, but by no means wholly there. I would add one other thought on communities, if I can, which is John's already pointed to it a little bit in saying that the area in which we've recently started work down in the southeast of the county is a long way from where we've been working recently. And we found on beginning to work there that what the VCH was pretty unknown territory, and there is a conversion exercise to be undertaken on moving into a new area of trying to get any community interest in what we are, or understanding of what we are about. There's a sort of a missionary exercise to be undertaken, and that applies both at the in the community of those who might donate. I mentioned that Madeline Bessborough kindly hosted a reception for us at Roche Court. Persuading people they wanted to come to it wasn't particularly easy, because you had to get them to understand there was actually something here that was interesting to find out about. And we'll see how we go as we work with individual parishes and trying to get their interest. But there's trying to engage a community that hasn't had any VCH activity in it beforehand is not straightforward.
Mm, mm. I think, you paint, both of you, a picture of, real complexity, the different communities that you're engaging with, the challenges of moving between different locations and geographies. Managing this is hugely complex, but really, really interesting to hear about. I'm going to move to Justin, who has a question now. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks. Yeah, perhaps just picking up that idea of how you might engage with different people. I noticed that I think it was David mentioned early on the success of online events as a way of engaging, and then I noticed Louise perhaps superficially seeming to contradict that, talking about the importance of in-person events and engagement. I imagine that's about different contexts. So I wonder if I could ask you kind of both to reflect on how you developed your strategy of how to best use those two things in different circumstances or to different ends.
Okay, I'll offer a thought, and then Louise can tell you that I've got it wrong if she wants to. The way it strikes me is that Louise's context, I think, is involvement of a parish where you're locally with a collection of people who are around you. The sorts of events I was talking about are aimed much more widely at the whole county, or as wide as you want to be, where we have found that offering an event like this online attracts people, and you're not limited by the number you can fit into a parish hall or whatever. You can have as many people as care to sign up, and in our instance, pay for signing up. So we found that lectures given online and then followed by question sessions like this are proving popular, more popular than in terms of the numbers we get at them than the equivalent that we could offer in local halls, partly because of the limited accommodation, but also partly because it's so much easier for people to take part than get into a car and travel potentially a long way to a talk. It's so much simpler to do it while you're sitting in front of your computer. So I think that's why it works well for the sort of audience we're concerned about, but I may have misunderstood why Louise found it better in a parish context. I don't know if she wants to add anything.
No, I think both have their place. The online through COVID, online was absolutely incredible, and we couldn't have continued the project without the opportunities presented by, you know, talks through Zoom. And we also were able to move our research online. So I came up with a lot of online activities that people could get involved with, looking at census returns, looking at wills and stuff, which were all accessible online. So it definitely has its place, and it's incredibly important. But I think for me, it was the online stuff, it was the in-person stuff, which really felt that where we made the connections. The children's festival, we couldn't have engaged with the children in that way if we hadn't done that in person, and that was so wonderful. So we had storytelling, we got some artifacts from Wiltshire Museum, and their education officer came. We had the kids recreating some medicinal recipes that I found in a commonplace book. And then in the festivals themselves, when we had everyone turning up at the village hall, when it feels like the whole community is there, talking them through some of the stories, and it's just the vibe that you can get from a room is, you know, incredible. It's not the same online. This is wonderful, and it does make it more accessible. And there was certain things, we did some oral history interviews, which we were able to do through Zoom and even on the telephone. So I think it's different strokes for, it just depends on what you need at what particular point, and you know. But I think in approaching it really broadly, we were able to, I think it was about probably 600 people, I think we reckoned we engaged with in a community of about 900. So I think we did, I think we did pretty well.
Sounds very impressive. And sorry.
Add one point.
That I think Wiltshire does have a problem, which many counties have, of course, that it, unlike, say, Hereford or Leicestershire, where there's a county town in the middle of the county, Wiltshire is always, for many aspects of government and society, is a very disparate county, and people who are interested in Swindon aren't going to be interested in Salisbury or interested in the West Wiltshire towns, and it's a problem for the VCH, and it bears on what David just said and what Louise said, but also on the previous discussion about how difficult it is to engage a far-flung part of Wiltshire with the history centre at Chippenham, and it's a problem that we suffer in Wiltshire, but it's less of a problem in many other counties, which are more sort of central, you know, have a centre, I think. But that's just a gloss really on what's been said.
But it's really important. I mean, you know, you heard it here first. Geography is important. Yeah, really crucial. And I think those different perspectives on events and engagement reflect again, don't they? Just the diversity of what you're doing, the different audiences that you're engaging with in different ways for different purposes. I'm going to be a bit cheeky and squeeze in one more question of my own, because I know that it's something that will be of interest to other VCH colleagues in the room now, and also others in the VCH community and beyond who'll be watching this recording in our archive. So more broadly, the VCH community has really all had to come to terms with this withdrawal of county council funding in almost every case, in almost every county. What I'm really interested in is that you are pointing towards thinking about that kind of funding streams at a very different level, at a much more local level. You're thinking about connections with parish councils, and I'd love to hear some more thoughts on that. Do you think the scope for the VCH to be doing more at that parish council level, seeking further funding across the country at that level? And if so, what would your tips be for making those contacts, for building trust, for seeking that funding? Because you're building up a proven and successful approach to this. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts to share on that. Louise.
That's a really difficult. To be honest, I've been astounded given how tough it is, you know, for councils and parish councils in terms of their funding, how they've been so receptive. It's when they see what is possible and, you know, the standard of work. And, you know, if you get local people behind you, and such as in Kington, when people were willing to take it to a parish council meeting and say, well, we want to have a history book, can you fund it, please? You know, yeah, so, yeah, it's just, but it's from the seed that was planted, I think, in Bramhill. It's got a life of its own, and it's got some traction, and just getting there and talking to people and showing them what is possible. At Kington, I talked about the VCH and, you know, how we go about creating a parish history, and then I was able to share some of our early findings, such as the fact, you know, about the Black Death, for example, and how my colleague Mark had done some work, and what we'd found is that there had been a 56% reduction in the local population between winter 1348 and winter 1349, and it was amazing when we had it up on the board, the names of people who'd actually perished over that summer, and it was incredible. People were like, wow. And you know, and from that you have a momentum, and parish councils are part of the community. They're embedded in communities, and so yes, I think there's definitely potential for the VCH in my very roundabout way, but I can't give you tips. All I can say is about my practice and how I've seen that, but certainly I think there's tremendous potential.
I think what you have given us, Louise, you and your colleagues, you've given us wonderful models. You say that this has got a kind of momentum now in Wiltshire, working with parishes, one is leading to another. And I think in your work in Bramhill and the Kingtons, we now have models that we can show elsewhere in other communities and other counties and say, this is what might be possible. Those are there, they can be inspiration, they can be invitations to others, which is really exciting. Does anyone else want to add on this subject of funding?
I was just going to come in a little bit on this, and that is that the local fundraising, which Louise has described, very successful, aimed, I think, Louise, I'm right in saying, almost entirely at the production of the local histories. And if you were to look at, and I'm not quite sure how you would do this, but the net effect of our work in Bramhill and the Kingtons on funding for the Red Book, Volume 20, what I'm guessing is that there certainly will have been some spin-off. You know, perhaps people will have attended a summer garden party who wouldn't otherwise, or donated via our website. But so far, I think it would be perhaps rather overselling us to say that we've successfully got local level funding initiatives coming into the VCH, which into the Red Books, which is not the same as saying I don't think that's a possibility as we develop this approach further. But I think that's where we are at the moment.
Can I add 1-2 thoughts to that? And yes, I agree with James's thought that the to a fair extent, the parish involvement has been stimulated by the fact that we are there and doing something, and have had the finances available to be able to do that. That's got parish enthusiasm going, and they wanted to develop it and take it forward in other ways. So that by and large, we are reliant at least on fundraising efforts we can do within the 100 concerned, if not within over as much of the county as we can cover. Though there is an exception that in the Chippenham volume, Chippenham Town Council have made specific grants towards helping Red Book work, but then that's a big town rather than a small parish.
Yeah. Again, I'm just struck by the agility of your engagement at different levels with these different funders, and then, you know, your kind of flexibility in how you collaborate. Yeah, red books, of course, are always going to be the VCH gold standard, but I think that these smaller pots of money funding perhaps different kinds of engagement and different kinds of outputs, it's really exciting to see that becoming part of the VCH ecosystem as well. I think we are reaching the point where I should be drawing the seminar to a close. We'd said we would aim to be finished by 7 o'clock this evening. I want to share a few notices before I thank our speakers and draw us to a conclusion. First of all, I want to remind you about our next Centre for the History of People, Place and Community seminar, which is online on Wednesday, the 19th of June, when we'll be hearing from Hannah Worthen of the Risky Cities project at the University of Hull on watery archives, researching the floods of the past alongside the communities of the present. So please do join us for that. And one of my Wiltshire colleagues, you referred to your next VCH Wiltshire online talk on the 26th of June. Who wants to do a plug for that and remind everyone what that was?
It's Rosalind Johnson.
Sorry, was somebody else starting? This is Rosalind Johnson, who is one of our researchers who has been doing the extra parochial area of Clarendon and Clarendon Park over the last while, and has now completed her research on that area, and will be speaking throughout in one of our online sessions on Wednesday, the 26th of June, to tell us all about what she has discovered about Clarendon Park. If you are interested in taking part, it's £10 a head, and you can get at it, you can arrange access by going to our website, which is www.wiltshirehistory.com. But I suspect John wants to add something.
And the link is in the chat for anyone who wants to follow that up. John?
Well, it's wiltshirehistory.org.
That's the link in the chat, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't understand. Yes,
Great. Well, in that case, after we've done our plugs for our various events, which we really hope that we will see you at, I'd really like to thank my colleagues from VCH Wiltshire today, David, James, John and Louise, for sharing these insights, for giving us so much food for thought, so many models to think with and to think about in terms of the future of the VCH locally and more broadly as well. Really inspiring and also just hugely informative and pragmatic as well. So thank you all very much indeed for your contributions this evening, and as ever for everything you do that is so evident in your short summaries this evening, everything you do for the Victoria County history.